you get a donut?
I did not get a donut.
You like donuts?
Listen, you got.
That's why you're so thin. You see?
You got ties. You got ties here.
I got connections.
You got good connections. There we go. Richard is online.
All right.
Okay.
First question is, I'm going to give you the psychology end of it, whereas the rabbi gave you the religious end of it, what's going on. So the psychology end of it, okay? All right. Reuben looks very dubious of what I'm about to say. Okay. So one of the toughest questions in the book of Genesis, how could Joseph estrange from his father for 22 years and didn't tell him he was alive? Why didn't he tell him he was alive? I'm going to tell you why. Joseph was very, very young. He might have been about, let's say, 15, 16 years old when his brothers spirited him away and took him away to be sold to slaves. What the price was, we do not know. But the main factor is he was taken away, and much like we are at this age too, like my daughter's 17. So people who are 17, 18 years old, they want to get away from home, they want to go on their own, they want to strike out on their own. Had Joseph not stayed home, he just would have been an ordinary person. But for some reason, his being spirited away, his being put in a hole, his being taken, made a slave, he was able to find a place in his mind and actually blossom, become a person, become a human, become a man. And he was able to take his gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and make something of it. One of his gifts was being able to read dreams. Even today, we can read dreams. I can sometimes read dreams. If you have a dream, oh yeah, I can tell you. I can't predict 7 years of famine and 7 years of feast. It was only 2 years, by the way, in case you didn't know that. It was only 2 years of famine. But nevertheless, that's still very scary. I mean, we don't know when it's going to end. But that's the first thing. Second thing I wanted to mention was, once Joseph was able to liberate himself from jail, from whatever reason, he was able to get to the Pharaoh, who I'm sure was very much into mysticism. Once he was able to get out, he was able to keep his position by, well, of course, they saved food. What he did was he put away food, and he did it the right way, where others could not. He was more or less an agronomist. He was an agronomist, an economist. He was a person with very good natural instincts, and he was also able to manage or to speak in a certain way which would make people listen to him. So as far as agronomist was concerned, he was able to put away food. When he's able to put away food, he's able to sell the food. The Pharaoh gave him the permission to sell the food. So people knew where to get food. People were starving. What do I do? What do I do about food? So we all make a trip to Egypt. By making a trip to Egypt, they brought their own money. They brought their own goods and services, which made Egypt a trading area. So it made their economy grow to one of the largest economies. Huh?
Make Egypt great again?
Well, no, he didn't make that easy. But why was Egypt such a great place? I credit Joseph with helping to make Egypt what it was. Because of him, because of his ability of food, people are very motivated by food. If they're saying, hey, you know where some food is? Go to Egypt. Go to Egypt. Where's the food? Oh, you know that guy over there, Joseph? He's got food. So he was able to earn money, spend it the right way, know how to give it to the Pharaoh, know how to build a city, know how to manage things. So Egypt became a destination. Roads. You have every couple of miles, you'd have people selling snacks or water. You would be on their way to Egypt. So he created a whole economy. That's why that's the psychology end of it. Okay, so you'll get into more of the religious aspects of it. But really, we owe Joseph quite a bit, because without Joseph, I believe one of the things that makes Jews different from others is because we find ourselves in positions where we have to examine ourselves and find out what we want to do, how we're going to protect ourselves in a way that doesn't hurt others. To work with, one of the things I was mentioning to you also was we try to accumulate, but not assimilate. Accumulate is what? Accumulate is whether it's wealth, or whether it's culture, whether it's our surroundings, and try to make the best of it for ourselves and for our families. Obviously, people get very jealous and they want to kill us because of it. But the reality is Joseph actually was one of the greatest foundations. Also, there's four or five parshot that are related to Joseph. Okay, so I'll bring the rabbi back.
That's beautiful, Richard. Way to go.
Yeah. They can't see me.
Not gonna retire. I can see you.
Okay.
I'll send you the video, but it's all on tape. It's all recorded.
Can I make myself clear? I can do it again.
You made yourself very clear, and everything is on file.
He brings it out of me. He's the rabbi. He brings it out of me.
Elizabeth. How's it going, Elizabeth? It's okay. You can take a seat. There's so many seats. Marty, because you're not sitting nicely next to the table. Everybody's scared. Everyone is scared to sit.
Hello. Yeah, don't be scared.
We have more cake.
You sure?
Yes.
It's not going over with the boss?
Yeah. We'll get it over you. Okay. And off we go. Well, boy, after that introduction, what could I add? What could I add, Richard?
Nothing.
Okay. At least you're being honest. Despite all that.
You gotta know it's religious area.
Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to discuss what we wrote in the questions, trying to explain Joseph's behavior. Elizabeth, you did some reading about the weekly portion. You know the background of our story. How about Marty? Marty, you prepared the cheat sheet this time?
No.
You don't know the background?
Big trouble.
Big trouble. You've been hiking.
Well, sort of like that.
All about Joseph.
Because
They throw him in the pit.
but at the beginning, he was, the previous chapter, he was slandering his brothers.
Absolutely.
When he was only
Correct.
16,
Remember, it was
17.
last week we discussed that. We were saying about France and the policeman who shot the robber, and they were overreacting, and we said the brothers had overreacted to Joseph's slandering by putting him in the pit.
Besides, his father was very obviously, he was putting all his love
Right.
on Joseph.
He was favoring Joseph over the
Which is
brothers.
Correct.
Not supposed to be like that.
Supposed to do that. So
Correct.
I can understand the brothers.
Right. But you know how the story continued, right? They sold him as a slave, and then eventually he became the king of Egypt, and he saved the world from starvation, right? Because he told Pharaoh about the dreams. Today we're going to discuss what happens after he becomes a king. Like Reuben said, when Joseph was a slave, when Joseph was in prison, we don't have much to argue of why he did not report to his father. But what happens when he's a king? Now he's a king in Egypt. He knows that his father could not forget him. There's a decree, it's written, there's a decree that if a person loses someone dear to them, loses as in death, as in passing away, the decree is, it's a heavenly decree, that time cures everything. Time heals everything. And as time goes, a person would slowly, gradually forget, not completely forget, but not as time goes. When somebody loses a parent, they know this is the way the world works, right? There's an older parent, and they finish their journey in this world, and then their children, of course, are in sorrow and sadness over that, but they accept it as nature, and then slowly, gradually the pains gets deducted and gets less and less until it's not really, it's always in the back of the mind. Thank God both of my parents are alive and well. They should be like that at least for another 120 years, if not more. I haven't experienced that, but the nature of the world is. But Jacob, he could not forget. He could not forget his son. This was much more, and he realized there's something in the story that was presented to him. Yeah.
He wasn't sure about the way Joseph died because he could feel there was something.
His energy was
Right. Yeah.
Or something, and so I think it's very hard to forget someone.
Correct.
Sure about the way the person has died.
So Joseph knew that his father is probably missing him and probably thinking about him. He should have just tell him that he's alive, that he's around. Why did he not do that? And why did he go about going this whole journey? You didn't prepare your cheat sheet, so I'll tell you a little bit about the story. The brothers came to Egypt to buy food, and Joseph summons them and says, "You're spies, you came to see the nakedness of the land, you came to destroy this country." And they say, "No, we just came to buy food." And he starts giving them this whole story about how they're spies, and they tell him, "We've been 12 brothers, one is missing and another one stayed home." And he said, "Also bring the brother that stayed home." And then they sent, he leaves one brother there, Simon, he leaves him there, and they go back to their father to bring their brother, and the father gets upset. He said, "Joseph is gone, Simon is gone, I want to take Benjamin." And then until they persuade him to send Benjamin, they send him. Joseph sees his younger brother, who he had no animosity towards, because Benjamin was not there when they sold him as a slave. He was just a little boy. He wasn't even present. So obviously he had no anger and no sadness towards his brother. But he still makes this whole plot where they put the goblet. You read it. They put the goblet of Joseph into the bag, the sack of Benjamin, and then they go and they find it, and they say, "Whoever the goblet was found in the sack should remain here as a slave to the king. And of course, that's when everything erupts, and Judah can't take it any longer, and he confronts Joseph, and Joseph eventually admits who he is, and he reveals himself to his brothers. So why did he go about doing this whole thing? There's a story it brought in the Zohar. I couldn't find the translation to English in it. Yes?
This is Zohar. It's not talking mountain in Israel, right?
That's in Meron. That's where
Meron,
the
right.
composer of Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is buried. Correct. On Mount Meron. In Meron, there's Rabbi Shimon. Shimon?
Shimon's.
Right, same Shimon we just said.
Okay.
Bar Yochai. Okay. So Rabbi Abba was one of the most important disciples of Rabbi Shimon. We don't know much of Rabbi Abba. He's not mentioned that much in the Talmud. But still he was very important because he was the scribe. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was saying all these beautiful ideas that came to his mind from years of studying and contemplation and concentration. So he was like flowing with ideas, with things of the Torah. And if it wasn't for Rabbi Abba sitting there and actually recording everything, we wouldn't know any of that. So Rabbi Abba was the person who actually put in writing everything that was said by Rabbi Shimon and his son. And in the Zohar, there's a story that happened with Rabbi Abba. Once Rabbi Abba stood in the entrance to the city called Lud. Lod, it's a city in Israel. That's where the airport is, by the way, in the outskirts of Lod. And he sees a man lying on the floor, resting, taking an afternoon nap, a rest. And he sees a snake coming close to the person, and is about to bite that person, a snake. And then, just before he responds to the snake, warning the person, waking him up, throwing a stone, he sees another, it was a rat or something, that attacks the snake. And the snake leaves. The snake goes away. A little while gone, Rabbi Abba had to be in that place, and this person wakes up. As this person wakes up, as he gets up, and he leaves the place, a tree falls on the place that he was lying, on the place that he was sleeping just a minute ago. A tree falls on this. So Rabbi Abba says, first the snake, then the tree. What's going on? He turns to this person and says, are you a holy man? Are you a righteous person? What's going on? You were spared, you were saved twice from certain death. What is the merit that you have? Why does God perform this miracle to you? So he says, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, what is so special about you? Tell me one thing that is special about you. And he says, I don't know if it's very special, but there's one thing I took upon myself many, many years ago, and thank God I'm still holding on to it, which is I never go to sleep upset. I never go to sleep when I'm angry at someone. I would always think to myself and forgive that person before I fall asleep. There will never be a time that I'm asleep with emotions of anger, of animosity, of revenge. All these feelings, although they might exist during the day, I made a resolution before falling asleep, I would forgive completely to any person. So Rabbi Abba cried and said to this individual, you are in fact greater than Joseph the righteous, than Yosef HaTzadik, because you always forgive, and Joseph had a problem to forgive. That's how the story ends. And today we're trying to see whether that is true. No, I'm sorry, he didn't say he had a problem to forgive. He said he did forgive. He forgave his own brothers. He said, Joseph forgive, but you forgive everyone, even if it's not your brothers. He said, Joseph had forgiven, but that's his brothers. Eventually, these are the same blood and flesh, the same father, the same mother. They're his brothers. But you forgive everyone, even a stranger. That's what he says. So you're greater than Joseph. Yes?
Does the Torah talk about how much the brothers are older than Joseph? The older brother be 20 years older than him, maybe?
The names and ages do appear. I'm not sure Reuben's.
Are they much older than?
No, Rashi does bring the calculation. We know when Jacob married Leah, how old he was. And then, of course, he had Reuben, which was the eldest. And then Shimon, right? Levi. Yeah, I don't know by heart, but the calculation does exist.
I think you said Joseph was kind of the favorite of Jacob.
Yes.
Was that because of Rachel?
That was because he was the son of Rachel,
Okay.
which was beloved to Jacob.
So you're right. So you're asking a question. How can he not want to communicate with his father for 22 years?
Right.
But did he know he's pretty much a favorite? Did he know he's not?
So just to correct what I said, Rabbi Abba said you're greater than Joseph because Joseph forgave his own brothers. You forgive everyone. Okay, and look at what, this is a quote from Yalkut Shimoni. This is a verse in Psalms. O shepherd of Israel, hearken, he who leads Joseph like flocks, he who dwells between the Kuvim appear. So this is what the Yalkut Shimoni says. God does not only lead his people who are called Joseph, but that he does so in the manner of Joseph. Just as he stored food, you said that earlier, just as he stored food from the years of plenty as provision for the period of famine, so may God store up blessings for us from this world to enjoy in the world to come. We know that in this world, when somebody does something, it's very meaningful. Because when I do something positive, I had to overcome something. I had to overcome obstacles, challenges. In the world above, Dan, בעולם הבא, אין יצר הרע, אין מכשולים, אין תאוות, אין ישר עושים. Everything is done, autopilot. In this world, whatever we accomplish is ours because we do it with effort. And the greater the effort is, then the greater the blessing is. So God stores blessings from this world and cashes them, so to speak, in the world above. Just as Joseph provided for each according to his deeds, so may God sustain us according to our deeds. Rabbi Menachem said in the name of Rabbi Abin, just as Joseph's brother acted badly towards him, but he repaid them with good, so we act badly towards you, God, and may you bestow good on us in return. The brothers did not act to Joseph like a brother. They acted him like a stranger. But he acted with them like a brother. And today we're trying to test this and see what exactly motivated Joseph to choose that path of what he did to the brothers, what really stood behind it. And of course, we're trying to answer the toughest question, why didn't Joseph let his father know that he was still alive? No email. So we see Joseph did eventually bestow good on his brothers, but the journey, the way to do that was very interesting. It appeared to be that Joseph was not really paying them with good over their behavior. It appears to be that Joseph was playing their own game. And we want to ask why. Why would he do so? What made him do it? And obviously there was a reason that he acted in a certain way. And let's look at what Joseph said. Oh, seriously, you could have said a letter saying, I'm alive. But look what happens with Joseph. He's taking Shimon. He's asking them, if you are really sincere, if you're honest, go bring Benjamin. What's Benjamin to do with this whole thing? They came to buy food, give him food. You don't want to give him food, say, I'm not giving you food. And that's the rest of it. What's going on? He's taking Benjamin. He's accusing them all of spying. And then he's framing Benjamin. He's putting the goblet in his tack. And he's asking someone to put it in his bag. And then he says, guess what? Whoever has it in their bag is going to be my servant. What does he want from them? Why does he act in a certain way that appears to be completely contradictory to what we expect of Joseph, to what way we know Joseph, the way that when the brothers are crying over the pain of what they've done to him, when he finally reveals himself to them, he says to them, Lo atem shelachtem otina. It's not you who sent me here. Ki ima Elokim. Rather, it is God who sent me here. This was one big plan of God, just to make me a ruler of Egypt and to take care of my father and yourselves. So it wasn't you. Don't blame yourself. Don't accuse yourself. So that same Joseph, who appears to be forgiving, who appears to be accepting, we find him as a master of tricks, trying to frame the brothers, trying to get his brother Benjamin and blaming him with things. And what's going on? Let's look at what the Abba Banel said. Why did Joseph estrange his brothers and spoke to them harshly? This would have made him someone who seeks revenge. Even if they did want it to harm him, it was God that didn't let them. And all is for his own good. Also, why now, after 20 years, right? It's been 20 years since they sold him. Okay, that's it. Get over it. It's something that happened 20 years ago. What do you want from them now? What about his old father, Jacob, who is full of worries? How could he not have mercy on his father and took away Shimon from him? Right? He left Shimon. He left one of the brothers. He says, you go back, bring your younger brother. Leave Shimon. Don't you know your father misses you greatly? what would your father respond? If another son is missing, how would he respond? Would that be good? And or to us, Joseph acted almost with cruelty when arresting Shimon in front of his brother, and we put in brackets in front of his brother because it was also show. It was one big show. Joseph did arrest Shimon, but it was only in front of his brothers. As soon as the brothers left, he took Shimon out of prison. He had no intention of leaving Shimon in prison. It was one big show. But why put out this show to begin with? Who is he trying to impress? Why does he not have mercy on his own father? What makes him leave a son, a brother in Egypt, and asking for the youngest son to come, which we'll soon see. Jacob was very reluctant to send. What made him do that? Let's see. It's interesting, the Midrash says that Joseph was actually waiting for this day. He was waiting for his brothers to come. You wanted to say something?
Well, then also, why did he say bring Yaakov back with you too?
Yeah.
Why did he say that? Joseph revealed himself.
Yeah.
Bring Dad back.
Well, that part we'll get to, because he knew that Jacob was supposed to come to Egypt. Anyway, look at this. Joseph was not just, he met his brother and then everything surfaced. Oh my goodness, my brothers, they sold me. I got to get back at them. This wasn't a coincidence. He was getting ready for it. Look what the Midrash says. Now Joseph, this is a verse in Genesis. This was last week. Joseph was the ruler over the land. It was he who sold grain to the entire populated the land. And Joseph's brother came and prostrated themselves to him, and with their faces on the ground. Look what the Midrash says. Joseph made, when he became ruler, new rules. He's a ruler. He's nearly a dictator. Okay, throwing away the book of rules, 3 new rules introduced. He says one thing, a slave is not allowed in Egypt. No slaves are allowed to come to Egypt. What's wrong? Joseph thinks there's going to be time of famine. And my brothers are going to have to come down to Egypt. I want to make sure they come down. If they don't come, they're missing slaves. They just pick someone, they pay him, and they say, go to Egypt, get us some food. No slaves. A second decree. A person should not come with more than 1 donkey. Donkey was their lorry, their truck. That's how they carry stuff. So he said, if I'll give permission to bring donkeys, they won't send a slave, but they'll find someone who's going. And they say, take my donkey, load him with goods, and bring it back. Not more than 1 donkey per person. And the third thing, immigration. This was the first time immigration was introduced. Immigration in the airport. Everyone entering the land would have to write his name, his father's name, and the grandfather's name. And guess who gets reported? The son of Joseph, Menashe, son of Joseph, was receiving all the notes with the names. So Joseph became the ruler of Egypt, and he thought, my brothers are going to show up one day. I want to be ready. I want to make sure they come. So he says, no slaves, no more than 1 donkey. Everyone has to report when entering. Menashe, on a certain day, gets 10 notes. So-and-so, son of Jacob, son of Isaac. So-and-so, son of Jacob, son of Isaac. So-and-so, 10 notes. And he comes to his father. He said, the day had come. Your brothers had entered the land. Now, in order to avoid drawing attention, their father warned them. They were very mighty. They were very strong, the brothers. They looked very good and they were very powerful. His father said, mingle with the people. Don't stick out. Come in from different entrances. Don't go all together as a group. You will be a target. Just mingle around, pretend like there's nothing else. And they went around. But Joseph obviously was reported already. They gave him the notes. He knew that his brothers were coming. So 20 years he's waiting for them. And it finally happens. He gets the tip from his son Menashe. 10 brothers, sons of Jacob, son of Isaac, entered Egypt to buy food. And he summons them to them. He summons them and he tells them, come to see. And when they come to him, he started with this whole scheme, the whole plan that he had planned to begin with. And he said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. Yada, yada, yada. It continues. And he put them in prison for 3 days. First thing, he blames them to being spies. Then, of course, you're a spy. You're not supposed to be left free. Puts them in prison for 3 days. And then he says to them, if you are honest, your 1 brother will be confined in prison, and you go bring the grain for the hunger of your household. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and you will not die. He says to them, you told me a story about being 11 brothers. 12 and one is missing, one is home. Go get the 12th one. Go get him here. Then he commanded, right, and then eventually they come to him after persuading their father, which reluctantly sent Benjamin, not wanting to send him. Then he commanded them, right, they go and they meet with him and they eat with him and they celebrate and they're partying, and it seems like we're past the crisis. Joseph just wanted to test them, and they bring the son, they bring the 12th brother, and story's over. They're all celebrating, they're all dancing, and now time to go home. Before they go home, look what happens. Joseph commanded the overseer of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money into the mouth of his sack, and my goblet, the silver goblet, put into the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and he's purchased money. He tells the person in charge, you go and put evidence, you plant evidence, you take the goblet, you put it in Benjamin's sack, and of course, he chases them as they leave. He searched, and they tell him, what do you want? And he says, why did you steal? They said, we didn't steal anything. And he searches, and he started with the eldest and finished with the youngest, and the goblet was found in Benjamin's sack. And they are forced to return to Egypt after vowing that they were so certain that it wasn't them. They said, if you find a goblet with one of the brothers, you may kill him, and all of us will be your servants from now ever after. They were so certain. Why would somebody steal after such great hospitality? Okay, we came. There was a little bit of a misunderstanding, but eventually we came. We sat together. Why would we take something away from you? Why would we steal your goblet, the one that you like the most? So they were so certain of themselves. And they said, if you find it, you could kill the one you find it with, and all of us will be your servants. And clearly, it was found in Benjamin's sack. And the overseer of the house says, now Benjamin will remain my servant, the servant of Joseph, and the rest of you could return home.
Now Benjamin did not know that his brother.
Of course, no one knew that it was Joseph.
Well, he looked that different.
He looked that different. He acted differently. He spoke a different language. Yeah, I guess.
I think it was man in bed. He shouldn't think the guy in the suit.
Yeah, that's, he must have gained weight too. Also, he speak the local language too.
Yeah. Yeah, he pretended like he doesn't speak their language, right?
Yeah.
And of course, what is it that made Joseph take that path? What is it? There's certainly something here. It wasn't revenge, and he wasn't trying to prove that he's right and they're wrong. There was something in it that was intended, that Joseph acted in a certain way. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, because I think he wanted to bend to end it with his brothers. But it was very difficult to do it directly with them because of what had happened. But with the youngest one, he didn't know. I mean, it was easier through him to straighten out all the problems with the older brothers. So I can understand that. Like if I have a problem with someone, to the point it's very difficult for me to talk to that person. Maybe I can talk to that person child, because it's easier through a child to get to the father or the mother. I mean, that my explanation is very.
I understand. It's like opening a communication channel. I agree with you. That would be a terrific idea, to open a communication channel through someone that wasn't a side of the story. It wasn't there. But the way he did it, blaming him and planting this goblet and then chasing after them and saying, why did you steal? And finding it, the way it was done was...
Because what happens after when Judah says, take me as a slave, but let the young kid go.
You're right. It has to do...
So I think he's moved. He's so moved when he sees that, that he can see his brothers have learned a lesson.
Yes.
He's so moved that
That's very nice. That's what we're trying to get. Okay, we'll get there.
Well, 1 second.
Yes.
When he kept Shimon,
Yes.
sent him back to go get Benjamin. Benjamin didn't come back, right? He didn't come back. But now that's a long trip from Egypt to
Hey.
Jerusalem, or Hebron. That's a long trip.
Yeah.
He gave them some food to take with them, so they had food to eat.
Yeah, he gave him, not only did he give him food, they filled up their bags with food, and they gave him back the money. They all came equipped with money to buy food there in Egypt, and he gave them the food, and when they got home, they opened, and they saw all their money was there.
Yeah.
And they said, what's going on? Didn't you pay? What's going on? We didn't pay.
I'm going to tell you why he did that. He's trying to help his
Uh-huh. So that this dichotomy, there's one hand he's trying to help his father, on the other hand is causing all these pain to the father. What's going on? What is he trying to prove? Okay, so let's look at, indeed, why was Jacob afraid or reluctant to send Benjamin? Initially, the brothers went down to Egypt, and Jacob said, Benjamin will stay here with me. What's wrong? Is Egypt a bad place? So, 10 kids you jeopardize. If it's a bad place, don't send anyone. If it's a good place, what's the problem? Benjamin was not 2 years old. He was 30 at the time. Okay, this is not like, Benjamin was playing with the toddlers. He was 30 years of age. He could have managed on his own. He was also strong and mighty as his brothers.
It's an easy answer. Benjamin and Joseph were the sons of Rachel. And he already lost Joseph. He wasn't going to risk losing Benjamin.
Not only did he lose Joseph, he lost also Rachel. Let's look at what he says here. Let's look what he says here. The Rebbe says, the reason why Jacob was especially afraid about Benjamin and didn't send him is detailed on the very same verse. The verse says, but Joseph's brother Benjamin, Jacob did not send with his brothers because he said, lest misfortune befell him. Since Joseph died on his way to his brothers, Rachel died on her way to Israel. Jacob was extremely worried with regards to Benjamin. Mind you, this is the son of his beloved wife, who he lost on the way, who the son was lost on the way. So Joseph and Rachel, and now Benjamin, the triangle, going outside the house, going in the way, becomes a risky situation. And Jacob wants to avoid it at all costs.
And to this day, this is how Jewish families think. To this very, very day. I'm not letting you out the door. You stay here, you stay here.
Right.
That's what you do too, Rabbi, right?
Trying as long as I can. So then, this actually makes the question even greater. What caused Joseph to want Benjamin to come to him, knowing that his father didn't send him to begin with? Because he was worried, he was afraid. What made you want Benjamin? Of all people, you want to take Benjamin away from your father? Okay, we said you don't let him know you're alive. Okay, we said you want to get back at your brothers. But what is this thing? What do you want to do to your father? Your father doesn't want to let the boy out because he's afraid, he's scared, he has what to worry about. And what you do is ask that at all costs he has to come. If you want to get more food, you have to bring your brother. And
the dreams have to occur.
Very nice. Very nice. The dreams have to occur. Okay, let's look what happens when Joseph finally meets Benjamin. Mind you, this is the first meeting. After many, many years they didn't see each other. Joseph just went to see how his brothers were, and he never came back. Benjamin was a little boy there. He wasn't even aware of what happened. And finally, Benjamin is being brought to Joseph, and Joseph sees him. And he lifted his eyes and saw Benjamin, his brother, the son of his mother. And he said, is this your little brother whom you told me about? And he said, may God favor you, my son. And Joseph hastened, for his mercy was steered towards his brother, and he wanted to weep. So he went into the room and wept there. Joseph, seeing Benjamin, started crying. He ran out of the room, he went outside, and he cried outside. He didn't want to see him cry. What made him cry? Seeing his younger brother, of course, is very emotional. But let's look at what Rashi says. What? Nichmeru achamav. His mercy was sealed. What happened? There was some sort of a discussion between Joseph and Benjamin. Let's look what the discussion was. His mercy was steered. He, Joseph, asked him, Benjamin, have you a brother from your mother? He replied, I had a brother, but I do not know where he is. Have you any sons? He replied, I have 10. He asked, and what are their names? He replied, Bela, Becher, Eshbel, Beri. He gives him 10 names of children. And he said, what is the significance of these names? Why did you name it this way? He replied, all of them are connected to my brother and the troubles that befell him. My first son was named Bela because he, my brother, was swallowed up, Nivla, that's in Hebrew, among the nations. My second son was named Becher because he, my brother, was the firstborn, Bechor, to my mother. My third son was named Ashbel because God put him into captivity, Shvaoel, and yada, there's 10 more names. He says, Echi, Verosh, Mupim, Chupim, Ve'al. He gives them all the names. And all of a sudden, he can't control himself. He says, look at that. I didn't know if they remember me. I didn't know if they think of me. And this young boy, who I left when I was a little kid, he never stopped thinking of me. He went to get married. He had children. Every simcha he had, every time there was some joyful moment in his family, a new baby was born, he gave him a name that's connected to me. He thought about me. He thought about the fact that I'm not celebrating with him now. I'm not there to be with him. I'm not there to be with the family. This brother, this young child that I thought maybe forgotten about me, is giving me 10 names of children, and each one of the names are to do with me. Thinking of me, remembering me, knowing me, missing me, not being aware of what's happening with me, and so on and so forth. And obviously that caused him to cry. Now, keep in mind, Joseph went through severe hardships in life. He was sold by his own brother. He was put in a pit with scorpions and snakes. He was sold as a slave for 3 times. He was accused of false because of the woman of his master. He was put in prison. And never did he shed any tear. He never cried. He never was upset. He never was cried. He never was overwhelmed with emotions. Everything that happened to him, he was a strong believer. He knew everything is a plan of God and everything is supposed to happen. And people, he treated them nicely, they treated him negatively. He wanted to help them, they wanted to hurt him. Everything, he finally, in prison, he helps this guy, he gives him the dreams, he gives him the solution. He says, please, as you go out, remember me, remind me, think about me. 2 years, nothing. He did not remember the minister of drinks, and he forgot him, completely forgot about him. Every time he does something positive to someone, negativity comes to him, and he never ever cries. He never loses it. But when he meets his own brother, and the brother tells him, I have not forgotten about you. He doesn't know whom he's talking to. He doesn't know it's his own brother. But he said, I've never forgotten my brother. And obviously that causes him to cry. That causes him to come out with a tremendous erupt of emotions over that.
And also Joseph had no kids, right? No wife.
Joseph had 2 children at that stage. Yeah, he had
The Egyptian woman or
the daughter of the Egyptian woman. The daughter of Potiphera, Osnat, was married to him. And they had 2 children.
Did he introduce the families a little bit?
What? No, afterwards. Yeah, not yet. They don't know it's his brother. It's their brother. So, after all this emotion, after crying for his brother, what the next step he does? He puts the goblet and blames him for stealing the trophy, for stealing the goblet, and wants to take him as a slave. Is this the way? You just got all emotional over your younger brother. You just said you came out of everything just seeing how your brother loves you, remembers you, appreciates you, cherishes you. And now what you're doing? You're putting the goblet and blaming him for stealing your trophy or goblet and bringing him back to Egypt. What's wrong with you? What are you doing? Well, you were the one just crying. What's wrong? There must be something that we're not getting that Joseph was trying to accomplish here. Otherwise, it just makes no sense. You know, you would say he's upset with them, he's angry, but look at his younger brother who loves him, who cherishes him. Of course he wants to do only good to him, but apparently it's not what happens. And this is what has to do with what Steve mentioned earlier. It has to do with the dreams. Here's what the Ramban said. Joseph, seeing the brothers coming to him, and they bow down, they prostrate themselves to him. Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamt about them. This is what Ramban. Joseph recalled that his dreams were not fulfilled completely. In his first dream, all of his brothers bowed down to him. 11 brothers bowed down. Since Benjamin is missing, he realized this is a sign he needs to bring Benjamin as well. When the first time when they came to buy food, he summons them, he says, you're spies. What happened? He summons them. The king calls you. You get to the king. Of course, you prostrate yourself. You bow down. And Joseph says, oh, wait. That's a part of my dream. They were bowed down. But wait, someone is missing. Someone is missing. My younger brother. In the dream, 11 brothers bowed down to me. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not Joseph being crazy about himself and being, narcissist. This was something, a prophecy that was given to him from above. And Joseph says, someone is missing. We have to make sure he comes back. And then they bow down to me. And then they prostrate themselves to me. This is one part. The second thing, as for the story with the goblet, Joseph was suspicious. This has to do with what Elizabeth said. Perhaps the brothers will hurt Benjamin out of envy, just like they did to him. This is why he wanted to keep Benjamin safe with him until they bring Jacob. Just like Elizabeth said, this was, and we're going to see soon what happens now, the fact that Joseph wanted Benjamin to stay, he had to make Benjamin stay. Obviously, asking him to stay would be result with a no. I'm sorry, I have to go back home. I need to be with my father. So he made this whole trick to make Benjamin. Why is it so? When they were celebrating with Joseph, when they were partying with him, Joseph showed he showed Benjamin to be favored. Favoritism to Benjamin. He made Benjamin favorite during this fiesta, during this meal. לכולם נתן לאיש חליפות שמאלות ולבנימין נתן 5 חליפות שמאלות. Everyone received a gift for him. Benjamin received 5 times of the gift. And then Joseph thinks to himself, what, am I crazy? Look what's going on. I just showed one brother over the other brothers that he's favorite. I just given him 5 times more than what I've given them. Now these guys, you're not supposed to show someone favorite over the other. I know better. When I was favored by my father, I ended up in a pit and sold as a slave. They plotted to kill me. I'm not going to let my little brother go down the same path. I'm keeping him here where he's safe. So Joseph had to go out of his way to think of a plot how to leave Benjamin until they bring Jacob. Why Jacob? You remember the dream. There was 11 stars and the sun and the moon. They were also in the dream. His father and his mother. They were also in the dream. They also are supposed to come to Joseph. Joseph remembers that. Just like Benjamin was missing in part A, now Jacob is missing in part B. I want to make sure they bring Jacob, but I don't want them to hurt Benjamin. So I better keep him here where he's nice and safe. Of course, the brothers don't see that this way. He says, whoever the goblet was found will remain here as a slave. He never intended to make Benjamin into a slave. He just wanted to keep him safe. But the brothers, they're not taking any risks. They're coming back, and they're coming back seriously, and they're coming back to war until Benjamin comes back. So, according to Ramban, which is a very interesting explanation, what Steve said earlier, Joseph was trying to make the dream come true, not only because it was a dream, but it was a prophecy. Mind you, the different dream Joseph encountered, Pharaoh, was clearly a prophecy. God showed Pharaoh the cows, and he showed Pharaoh the wheat. Why did he show him that? Because this is what is going to happen. There's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. We have to get ready. If Joseph would have taken it just as a nice gesture, he would never do anything about it. But just like Pharaoh's dream were prophecy, also his dream were prophecy. If it's a prophecy, that means it has to happen. If it has to happen, I want to enable it to happen. That's what Joseph did. He went out of his way to bring Benjamin, and then he went out of his way to bring Jacob. But in the time when he brings Jacob in the midst, he doesn't want Benjamin to be at risk with these brothers. But, okay, this is an explanation. But again, we're trying to see, is this something that Joseph was trying to make? Did someone appoint Joseph to fulfill these dreams? Okay, he had a dream, he had a prophecy, and this is going to happen. Now, usually a prophecy happens whether you like it or not. That's a prophecy. That's the nature of a prophecy. But did someone appoint Joseph to make this dream come true? To fulfill those dreams? And the answer is, indeed, it is so. Now, let me tell you a story about one of the sages called Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra was a poet, and he was one of the commentators on Torah. He was a brilliant person, but he expressed on himself, he said he was the unluckiest guy ever. He said everything he does is unlucky with and he's not successful with. He composed many songs. And in one of his songs he wrote that if he would be the undertaker, if he would be in charge of burying, people would stop dying. He's so unlucky. He said, if I'll take care of graves, nobody dies. Anyway, the Ibn Ezra had problem with their eyes. He had problem with his eyes, and he didn't have money. Of course, he was, as we said, a very unlucky person. Everything he wanted to deal with was always, he would buy, all the fabric, and now guess what? He'd buy Bitcoin, and now Bitcoin is down the drain, right? So don't buy Bitcoin. It's just an analogy. So the Ibn Ezra had a severe sickness, disease with his eyes, and he had no money to pay the doctor. And he heard there's in Egypt a famous doctor called the Rambam. The Rambam, Maimonides, was the doctor of the Sultan, and he thought maybe I should go to him, but I have nothing to pay him with. And of course, he didn't know that the Ibn Ezra was a genius and a scholar. But he was just a guy who seemed to be very unlucky and very not your cup of tea, so to speak. And he went and he finally made his way, and he describes his journey to Egypt as a very unlucky journey. You know, he probably missed the train and the boat and the bus and I don't know, whatever, the camel, whatever he missed, whatever he could miss, he missed. And eventually he finds his way and he gets to Rambam. And the Rambam, Maimonides, meets him and says to his servant, "Who is this guy? What does he want?" He says, "Put him there with the goats. Go send him. Tell him to go put him in the, what's it called? The dir. The stable. Stable is horses, right? But pen. How do you spell that? How do you spell pen?
I pronounce pen.
What? P-E-N, like pen? The same way? Yeah? So he says, send it to the goat pen. And he sends it to the goat pen. And Ibn Ezra says, oh my goodness, look at that, what's going on? And he started crying. It's smelly, it's disgusting. They kick him, and he started crying. And guess what? He started crying. He cries like he never cried before. And then he could see again. His eyes become clear. Everything. And the frustration, the anger. He did his journey all the way here. And look how the Rabbah treated him. He sends him to the goat. He cried so hard. And in fact, all the pus, all the things that he had in his eyes melted down. And the problem completely disappeared. Rambam, after a little while, came in to the goat pen and gave him a big hug and said, as soon as I saw you, I realized your only cure is actually to cry. And when you cry hard, then your illness will be gone. And eventually that's what happened. Obviously, Joseph should have told his father that he's alive. But Joseph did not want to leave the wound open. Hold on a second. Somebody's calling me already 20 times. Hello? I don't know who it is. כן, אני באמצע משהו. אתה חייב עזרה דחוף? זה פיקוח נפש? טוב, ביי. Okay, I don't know, I don't know what's this. Anyways, so Joseph says, I cannot move to the next chapter until I finish up this chapter completely. And Joseph we said, who appointed Joseph to fulfill his dreams? The dream or a prophecy, it's dependent on God. What are you going around bringing your son, bringing your father, bringing your brother, bringing your father? What's going on? Joseph actually felt that he was given a mission. And that's what has to do with what Elizabeth said. He has to refine and to correct his brothers. And Joseph felt like this. The dreams were, in the eyes of Joseph, a sign from above. It is up to him to lead the brothers to a totally different way of life. And it is a journey towards mutual responsibility. In fact, somebody does something wrong. Many people do something wrong. I guess maybe even you once did something wrong to someone.
Not you, Rabbi, never.
No, of course. I'm exceptional. Right. Me and Trump, we never do mistakes. Right? Never, ever, never. Yeah. I mean, Trump does mistakes. I never. So when a person does something wrong, of course they regret and they feel bad. And if it has to do with a third party, with someone else, they would ask for their forgiveness. And really, but what is the real test to know or whether that person corrected themselves? It is if that person stands in the same challenge, in the same test, and succeeds, and not fail. When a person not fails a challenge, a test they did fail earlier, that is truly a sign that they managed to make a progress. They managed to actually be better than what they were before. So Joseph does what Elizabeth was saying. Joseph was doing all this in order to test their brothers. He was trying to see whether they changed or not. And look what happens. He was educating their brothers. First of all, when he got them, he was calling them spies. Then he was taking Shimon and then Benjamin's story, a proof they changed. He wanted to see whether or not they changed. Joseph was correcting their brothers. He was refining them. And he, first of all, when they come to him, he says, I want you to know, you are liars. You are not telling the truth. You are spies. Of course they were not spies, and Joseph knew they were not spies. But he had to awaken that spark of truth within them. They lied to their father when they told him that Joseph was dead. They lied to Joseph, of course, what they did to him. Levi and Shimon lied to Shechem, right? They told Shechem, if you want to marry our sister Dinah, you have to circumcise yourselves. And when they circumcise themselves, guess what? A surprise. They make him a surprise party, right? They throw them a surprise party. He says, this is deceitful. This is being deceitful. And he says, your method, your system has to do with lies, with not telling the truth. So he tells them, first he calls them spies. Then he takes Shimon, then the story with Benjamin with the goblet. And look what happens. As soon as he starts that journey of refinement, look what they answer. He says to them, you are spies. And they say, you have accused us of being spies. This is not so. We are people of truth and dignity. All of a sudden, they start realizing they're not really liars. They're people of truth and dignity. Selling your own brother, putting him in a pit, lying on your father, doing this whole thing. Truth and dignity, is that so? But here, they start changing. The change starts to be created. The change is beginning. So first they tell him, we are not people of dishonesty, we're people of truth, we're people of dignity, and we, of course, have our word, and we say something, we mean it, and we do it. And then after preparing the infrastructure, first he awakens them to say something good about themselves. He takes Shimon. What does he do with Shimon? He actually brings them back to the same evening when they went back home without Joseph. And they plotted, they made this whole scheme. Yeah, Joseph was slandering them, and they thought he should die, and so on. And they came back home without one of the brothers, and they made this story up and look what happens. He takes Shimon, and he says, off you go. And he started going home. They're going home again without one of the brothers. What is going on? He brings them back to the mental state they were at 20 years ago when they sold him as a slave. He actually rearranges everything for the setting to happen again. And then he wants to see, how would they respond this time? Would they leave their brother behind? Would they just come back home without Shimon and make up a story? They could come back home and they would have told their father, listen, Jacob, we were in Egypt and there was some accident and Shimon is gone. He's dead. Okay, now let's go back to dinner because Shimon is no longer here. They could have just made up the story like they did on Joseph. They could have just tell Jacob, it is what it is, right? So they're coming back home, one brother missing, and they have to tell their father the truth. And guess what? They're doing exactly so. They're telling their father the whole truth of what happened to Shimon. And then, for the very first time since they sold Joseph, they actually express regret, express remorse. We spoke about it on Friday night, right? Reuben was telling them, I told you so. Look what they say. They said to one another, alas, we are being punished on account of our brother because we looked on his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That is why this distress had come upon us. And Abba said, just like we sold Joseph as a slave with our own hands and gave him to our enemies, now we will need to give up Shimon and leave him in prison. So Joseph arranges the whole setting for this to happen again. He wants them to feel the same situation is happening. How do they respond this time? What is going on? And then, of course, they feel regret of what they've done. They feel great sorrow how they sold Joseph. He remembers, and he makes them remember too. And guess what? It works. It actually works perfectly fine the way he did it for this to be arranged. And they remember, not only they remember, they express true regret of what they've done. So this is what happens with the Abraham. But regretting for what had happened is only partial with repentance. Can you stop, please? You're making noise. Regretting one thing is only a part of it. Like we said earlier, if you put the person in the same test, in the same challenge, but this time instead of failing, they succeed, then this is truly a sign that they have changed. And look what happens. He takes his brother Benjamin, and he says, whoever the goblet was found in his sack would be left as a slave. And again, the brothers are put in the same status. They could have just go back to their father and say, listen, this Benjamin is up to no good. He saw this goblet and he thought, oh, this will be a great gift or this will be a great use. And he took it. And guess what? He took it and now he stayed in Egypt. We're sorry. That's the situation. That's what it is. But instead, like Elizabeth said, the mutual responsibility grows, and they come back to Egypt, and they said, we're not going anywhere until you bring us back our brother. Well, 20 years ago, you remember you left a brother in the pit, and you went back home and telling stories to your father? Guess what? No more. This had changed. They're coming back and they're saying, we're not going anywhere. With Shimon, they had to go. Shimon, they left him in prison. Apparently, they thought it was a prison. Eventually, it wasn't, but in their eyes, it was. They did, but it wasn't complete. They expressed regret of what they done, but it wasn't complete. Only when they come back for Benjamin, and they say, we're not going anywhere until you bring us back our brother, because we're not leaving without our brother. This is not going to happen again. It happened before, but now we are different people. We have changed. We have corrected ourselves. We're not going anywhere until you give us our brother. And Joseph, double check. That's exactly what he wanted to accomplish. That exactly is what happened. And guess what? Immediately after that happens, story's over. Joseph reveals himself. I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. I love you. Go bring my father. That's it. There's no reason to stretch it any longer. There's no reason to pull any more tricks. This was what was trying to accomplish. Joseph was trying to make the brothers show mutual responsibility. We call it in Hebrew, arvut hadadit. Caring for each other. Caring so much that I will not leave without you. I will never leave a brother behind. I will never leave a son of my father or my mother behind. I will never go back and tell stories to my fathers, stories that had happened or had not happened. This is not going to happen. It happened once, but I have corrected myself. So said the brothers, we corrected ourselves. This is not going to happen again. And look, the Rabbi says, Joseph's reasoning is, Joseph was doing all this in order to test his brothers. Will they abandon Benjamin and leave him there, or will they do anything to bring him back? Only when he realized they really changed, he revealed himself to them. And this is what the Torah is brought by the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. It was all for their own good. They will be rinsed and purified of their sin for selling Joseph only by going through what Joseph had put them through. He only did that out of love and care for his brothers. So what happens is Joseph could not let his father know he's alive until this chapter had ended, until the brothers had really changed. Otherwise, we're not getting anywhere. Joseph felt that God bestowed upon him this mission. God gave him this challenge. You have to make your brothers better. You have to correct what was done wrong. And you will do everything in your might to do that. And that's why Joseph was reluctant to let his father know. It was a heavy price to pay, not letting his father know he's alive. But he did it because he loved his brother so dearly, and he loved his father so dearly, and he wanted to make sure this situation would never happen again. And that's what made him do all that he done. And this is actually the journey of the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is filled with stories of brothers. The first two brothers, Cain and Abel, murder. One kills the other. The second two brothers, Isaac and Ishmael, complete separation. They go different ways. Jacob and Esau, there's a hug. We said there was one hug that was serious, but the rest of the time there was animosity, there was hatred. And then comes the last story of the book of Genesis. How do we correct all that? How do we correct all those sets of siblings? We bring reconciliation. Joseph and his brothers. Joseph said, I could have let my father know. And guess what? He would get pissed at the brothers. Look at this. You've been feeding me lies for 20 years. You're telling me Joseph is dead? He's not dead. He's the king of Egypt. You sold him as a slave. And guess what? What happens? Again, the book ends on a bad note. Joseph had to go out of his way to make this whole story happen. 20 years he thought of this day. 20 years he planned. He made those 3 decrees. He put his son to be in charge of who's going into Egypt. He brought their brothers, and he brought Benjamin, and he brought his father. He did all that in order to reach reconciliation. And that reconciliation was finally reached. And that's why Jacob had lived his best life. 70 last years he lived in Egypt, because he lived with his sons after reconciliation. And that's what Joseph brought about. And that's how the book of Genesis ends. Okay. What? No, next week is the last Parsha, last portion of Bereshit. That's when Joseph basically passes away. Jacob passes away, and then Joseph passes away. Next week is the end of Genesis, and then starts the book of Exodus.
He says slowly one more time. So he sends the brothers back to Israel.
Yeah.
And says, bring Benjamin. So now the whole time he has Shimon in custody. But now I understand he lays out the whole scheme where he gives them, he waits to see if they want Shimon back. He puts Shimon in a pit or in prison, and then they ask for him back. And then once he said they want him back, then he revealed himself.
No, when Shimon was kept not in prison. They thought it was prison. Yeah, he was kept, but they missed one chance. I wouldn't say they missed one chance. They started their process of repentance by expressing regret of what had happened. But at the end of the day, they came back without Shimon.
Yeah.
They came back only when Benjamin was brought. And then this was the same setting because Shimon was not favorite over the brothers, but Benjamin was. Joseph, when Benjamin was brought, Joseph celebrated with everyone and he made Benjamin sit next to him. He gave everybody gifts. He gave Benjamin 5 times the gift. And then he realized, I can't send him back. This is going to be dangerous. I'll send him back. He's the favorite. They might, but and then he said, I'll keep him here. He keeps him here, but then he gains that the brothers would say, we'll give everything to get our brother back. We would never leave Benjamin. Would never leave anyone behind, right? So then.
And what about Benjamin's family though? He kept messing with their family.
Oh, this whole story didn't last long. They celebrated with him, and then they came back. It was the same. The morning they left, in the afternoon they were already by him. So it wasn't such a delay. It was like missing a Hong Kong to Taipei flight, just a few hours.
This is a dumb question here too. And that is, you had 10 brothers.
Yes.
And they all, that's called conspiracy. To
Okay.
put Joseph in a pit.
Yeah.
Did anyone